Welcome to another episode of Toya Talks Wrestling. We're gonna continue on with the Mr. McMahon documentary series. We're gonna talk about episodes 5 and 6. I know I was supposed to have this episode out on Saturday, but this weekend was pretty busy for me and I had some other stuff to do, and I thought I would have time to watch the last 2 episodes and do a video, but I didn't. So I'm going to either try to get this out on Sunday or at the very latest Monday. Anyways, so we're going to talk about 5 and 6 like I mentioned. Episode 5 was called Family Business. It started out with basically giving a slightly more detailed of Vince McMahon's childhood before he met his dad, his real dad, what it was like with his stepdad and his mom growing up. I'm not gonna go into the whole damn thing, but I guess it kind of sets the tone of how he is today, I guess you can say. It follows up by talking about the family business. They talk about Shane, Stephanie, and Linda McMahon. They start off with Shane. As you know, and some of you all know, Shane McMahon, he was pretty much wanted to be like his dad, just like Vince McMahon wanted to be like his dad. He worked in the wrestling. He didn't go on TV until way later. He worked as, he put up the ring and he did some errands, and he eventually went to being a ref, to an announcer, to someone that was I guess you could say a sidekick to Vince McMahon. They talked about Triple H, Stephanie McMahon's relationship, how that relationship started, how Shane McMahon didn't approve of Triple H, dating Stephanie, how Vince McMahon didn't have a problem with it. There was absolutely no mention about, Triple H being with China before she was with Stephanie McMahon. From what I heard, so this is what they said on the thing, that pretty much Stephanie was doing the interview, and Stephanie was Vince McMahon, my father, was you should marry someone or date someone like Triple H. And then Shane McMahon was but not Triple H. No, not Triple H, but someone like Triple H. And it's kind of they said that was pushing them together. What I heard back in the day was that, Stephanie McMahon had a crush on Triple H, and Triple H was with China at the time, and Stephanie McMahon went over to her dad and said, hey, I want to do a storyline with Triple H. But over here in this interview, they're talking about Triple H doing a storyline with Stephanie McMahon when she marries Stephanie McMahon at the in Vegas in a drive-through wedding thing, whatever. I don't know which one is true, but I figured maybe the other one, the one with China, she was with China because China was really hurt. And they got rid of China. They fired her or whatever, so they got rid of her. So I don't know what is true, but I think maybe that's why Shane McMahon don't like him, because it's maybe she just thought that, at the end of the day, that Triple H was just using his sister to get to where he is now. I don't know. Can't really say. I don't have no opinion on that. If that's true, that's fucked up. But if it's not, whatever. I don't know. Another thing they talked about, obviously, Linda McMahon. Linda McMahon, he told Vince McMahon that she really didn't want to be on TV, but, it kind of was it's supposed to be a family business on the on-screen TV thing. I would say that everyone loved Linda McMahon, but as far as acting goes, she wasn't one of the best actors in the on the show, I would say. She had her moments. Everyone loved her, right? She was easy to love because she was the likable one. She was probably the one that more the innocent one out of all these. Like, out of all four of them, she was the innocent one. And I think that's why people loved her. But, like, I don't think she'd be winning any Oscars for any of her performances. But because who she was and how lovable she was, everyone loved her. And, like, they talked about, how her character basically was just kind of like just the mom, you know what I mean? It was just like, everyone just loved her. Trish Stratus was pretty much Mr. McMahon's love interest girlfriend, as you can say. And they talked about like how Linda McMahon was saying how she was telling Trish how like, oh yeah, you should kiss me on my forehead, and that would just piss people off. Like, she was all up in the business. Everything in the business was just to like piss you off. Like, they talked about how Trish was on all fours and was barking as a dog, and like how you feel bad for her. And Trish was like, well, duh, that was the whole point. You were supposed to feel bad for me. That's why we did it. It was for that reason. It was like, we wanted you to feel a certain type of way, so that's why we did what we did. Which I'll admit, at the time when that happened, I felt bad. I was like, wow, this is some fucked up shit. Like, what are you doing, Vince? Like, what the fuck, right? But like, as you hear it now, it's like, okay, it makes sense because it worked, right? You felt bad for Trish. You're like, god dang, dude. Also, because a lot of times wrestling back then was like, a lot of guys are watching, and a lot of guys probably wouldn't be able to get a woman who looks as good as pretty as Trish Stratus. And this is like their fucking payback. This is like, oh yeah, well, you don't want me to fucking talk to you, you don't want me to do this, well, this is their fuck you to Vince McMahon. So that could be a part of it too. So it's different angles of this. So yes, they're supposed to make some of us feel bad, and some of us is like, yeah, that's right, fuck that bitch, make her do all this fucking deviant ass shit, you know what I'm saying? Another thing they mentioned, the match between Shane McMahon versus Vince McMahon at WrestleMania. Shane McMahon did not want to fight his dad in real life. He was like, I can't do it. And, Vince McMahon is like, well, I'm not holding back, and starts just smacking him and everything else. Eventually, Shane got out of it and he started fighting his dad and everything else. It's probably one of, like, the good matches, the better matches this had between a father and a son. I think the other match probably would be Rey Mysterio and Dominic Mysterio at a WrestleMania. But this match, I really enjoyed it. You would see, because at this time, Linda McMahon, she's just like under, like, she's been drugged pretty much. She's been drugged, and you see her going into the ring, because like, she actually gets thrown into the ring by Vince, and then Vince ends up getting up from a chair and kicking like Vince in the nuts and everything else. It was like a feel good moment and everything else. Shane got his win, as you may know. Some of you might not know, might not have watched the show, but he got his win, and yeah, that was good. Stephanie was obviously on her dad's side, and Trish Stratus got to slap Vince McMahon, so everything was great. Another thing they discussed was about, I think Vince McMahon did an interview with Playboy, and he pretty much admitted to having an affair with someone. They didn't mention the name and everything else. And the guy who was interviewing from Netflix, I guess, was saying, well, why did you admit to the affair thing? And he's like, I'm not gonna hide it and everything else like that. I'm gonna admit my faults and everything else. And they had like some words and everything, but like, he actually admitted that he had an affair and that he made a mistake. Also, they talked about WCW basically just failing. WCW was failing because it was being brought out, I think like AOL or some company bought them out, and they know nothing about like wrestling and everything else, and they were just making all kinds of just weird matches and everything. Like when you went to WCW, there was like 995,000 people in the NWO. They were doing weird like something off the pole match. It was just weirder and weirder and weirder as time went by, and it's just like, what in the fuck happened to WCW? Like who killed WCW? There's another documentary I need to finish, but anyways, there was so much stuff, right? People were like, well, maybe Bischoff don't know what he's doing. Bischoff was like, well, no, there was these people who bought the company who didn't know nothing about the business. And I can understand that. I can understand that perspective, because there's people who say they look at something and they say, hey, well, that's popular, maybe we should do that, and know nothing what the hell they're talking about, what they're doing. It's like, okay. So I think that's what happened with WCW. They talked about eventually Vince McMahon buying WCW. Now, mind you, they did not. I think he bought it for like, I think they said they bought it for like $2.5 million. Now, mind you, they didn't really talk about the whole like Shane buying the damn WCW on screen, whatever. They're talking about behind the screen and stuff like that. And they talked about how they did talk about how they had both WWE and WCW on like live together, but they never really talked about, you know, like the storyline and talk about Evasion. They never mentioned anything about that. They just talked about how, like, you know, Vince McMahon pretty much bought his competition, and that was pretty much that. They also talked about other things, like I think that WWE started buying like had a restaurant in New York and some other things, and the one thing they also talked about was the XFL. The XFL was probably the worst investment. This is what I'm talking about. Remember I talked about earlier about people buying things and thinking that, oh well, it seems popular and everything else. I think at this time this was like the NFL wasn't as popular, and Vince McMahon was like, oh, I'm gonna make the XFL. And I don't know what other people thought this was going to be like it's gonna be like football. It's like different kinds. There's like different rules to, obviously, to the actual NFL football game. You know, maybe people thought that they were gonna mix in like wrestling, because people love wrestling, and football together, because people love football and people love wrestling, and let's put them together and everything else, and that would be fucking awesome. And the first week everything was great, because if there's one thing that I will say about Vince McMahon, he's a great promoter of shit. You know what I'm saying? That is one of the things that is best about him, and he promoted the fuck out of this goddamn XFL for the longest time, right? And it was great, and it seemed like it was interesting, but after like a while, it didn't even make it like a year. You know, it made it for like 1 year, and it was done, over with. It was just terrible. Right? It was just terrible. It was so fucking bad. Like, what do you call it? Oh my god, what is that fucking word? A money pit, right? It was just a fucking money pit at the end of the day. I do remember one player called He Hate Me. I'll always remember that. I don't give a shit. He Hate Me. I was like, what a great fucking name. What a great fucking name. Because they didn't even have like regular fucking like last names. They just had like whatever fucking name. It was just crazy. Another thing that was discussed is when WWF finally became WWE. So WWF was a World Wrestling Federation. That's what it was back in, like, from like, as far as I know, from like the 80s to like the early 2000s. But it turns out that the initial WWF was actually the World Wildlife Fund. But like, if they try to fight for it, but they obviously didn't win, so they went from WWF to WWE. I think the World Wildlife Fund was probably like, oh, you know what, WWF is really popular now. Let's go ahead and sue them. Let's go sue them now. This is a good time, because then when people go search for WWF, they'll go to our website now. Pretty smart. Pretty smart of you guys. Okay, that's a genius move, right? But yeah, WWEF is now WWE. I remember that because I remember the whole slogan was, "Oh, WWE, get the F out." That was like the whole slogan for that whole year or whatever, for like a couple of years, something like that. I'm glad they don't say that anymore because I was so cringe. Vince McMahon and they talked about Vince McMahon hiring Hulk Hogan back. Basically, he hired like Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall in NWO. But they didn't mention like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and the NWO. They just mentioned Hulk Hogan. So Hulk Hogan was going to fight The Rock, this icon versus icon match, and everything else. So they talked about that a little bit. They also talked about hiring Eric Bischoff as Raw general manager. Like, it's one thing that Vince McMahon does not hold grudges as far as comes business wise. And it's like, you know what, we had this beef, you try to do this to me, try to do that for me, but if I can use you to make money and do a good storyline, oh, trust me, Vince McMahon will, without a heartbeat. You know what I'm saying? They're like, you can be mad at me all you want, but we can make this money. You know what I mean? Gotta have some respect for that, right? During also this time, it was like 2004, something like that. Rock goes and does Hollywood thing. He does his movies and stuff like that. And Stone Cold Steve Austin really didn't like what was going on in the business. He left. He also left due to like injuries and stuff like that. But he also said he just doesn't like what was going on. That's what he said in the interview. So then we were introduced to ruthless aggression. Went from Attitude Era to ruthless aggression, and pretty much started off with this like Kurt Angle and John Cena pretty much started this ruthless aggression. They had like a thing we were talking about Vince McMahon talking to like to the Raw, talking to the superstars on Raw, because at that time I don't think they were split up yet, and they're just like saying that, hey, who wants to be a star, who wants to be, who got ruthless aggression in them. And then the following night you had like SmackDown, and Kurt Angle's maybe like, who's gonna challenge me? And I think it was supposed to be like The Undertaker, but The Undertaker didn't show up or something like that. He wasn't there. So, they're like, hey, why not throw in John Cena? And John Cena went back there and went to the ring where Kurt Angle was, and Kurt Angle's like, what do you have that can beat me? And he's like, ruthless aggression, and punches him, and they had a match. And obviously John Cena didn't win that night, but he got other matches. John Cena was not very like, his character was just pretty much blah. Like, he's just a standard old this wrestler guy, whatever. Like, there's no charisma, no nothing. John Cena was on the verge about to get fired, and then one time they were on the bus, and a bunch of people were like rapping or freestyling in the back, and John Cena pretty much went back there and pretty much just, I guess he said he just just dominated everybody in that thing. And Stephanie McMahon happened to be on that bus that day, and she went up to John Cena and said, do you want to do that in the ring? And John Cena's like, hell yeah. So then John Cena became Doctor of Dogonomics. Pretty much saved his job. Him being a good rapper, I guess, in real life saves his real life job. So it's like, oh, well, that's good. I actually like John Cena as Dr. Dogonomics, and I'm really sad that it never got to come back. Well, I mean, he's still come back in retirement, so who knows? I don't know. Maybe he'll come back. I don't know. But anyways, yeah, that's how he saved his job. They talked about Vince McMahon being harder on his two kids, expecting them more from other people, which I guess I can understand that point of view, because that is your father, and you should take leave of their father. You know what I mean? It's like your father is a hard worker and has a great ideas, all this other stuff. I expect most from you because you come from me. It's like me with my kids. Like, I expect more from my kids because they came from me than I would from other kids. I know it's like, oh, it's pretty harsh or everything like that, but it is what it is, right? So it's understandable where he's coming from, why he's a little bit more harder than, probably with anybody else. And then they talked about in episode 5 was Shane leaving WWE. Shane wanted to be the next in line, I guess, to have WWE. And, Vince McMahon was like, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to do it. Paul Heyman was telling a story about how Vince and Shane McMahon were talking, and Vince McMahon was eating his lunch or something and had like a knife in his hand and gave it to Shane and says, how bad do you want it? Here, starts pointing to his chest, says, go ahead, stab me right here. Stab me right here. Otherwise you're not bad enough for this job. Right? Basically it was like, how far are you gonna go to get the business? Because Shane McMahon was like, oh, maybe you should step down, maybe you should retire and everything else. And he's Vince, he ain't retiring. He ain't gonna retire if you don't have to retire. You know what I'm saying? But they talked about that and everything. That was a story that happened. I can believe it happened, right? And that's why Shane left, because he couldn't do it. I think Stephanie, given the opportunity, I think Stephanie would do it. But Stephanie is just like her dad, right? I think Shane McMahon was considered I think Shane McMahon was thinking that he was just going to automatically get the business because he is the son of Vince McMahon. Like, how your dad is. That wasn't gonna be like this. Oh, here you go. No. He told Shane, like, Vince told Shane, like, you wanna buy me out? You can buy me out. But if not, you ain't getting it. Tough family business. You got, say this is why this is why you don't run a business with your family. And that was pretty much it for episode 5. Like I said, talked a lot about the family business and everything else. It was a pretty tame episode. But let's go on episode 6, the last episode, which was called The Finisher. I'm sorry, not The Finish. In this beginning of this episode, Vince McMahon talks about having 2 different brains, sometimes 3. I won't go into much details on that, but it was very interesting and weird at the same time. They also talk about like how the WWE was doing. They talked about Donald Trump being on the show when they had the whole billionaire versus billionaire, and they talked about how Trump is like, as of today, like, you can tell that maybe Donald Trump had a little bit of like a Vince McMahon presence when he talks, like on the debate stage or like in his rallies and stuff like that and everything else. Like Donald Trump is just a very good talker and a very good, just like, he's a man of the people. Not everybody likes him because, I mean, like, before this whole election thing, everybody loved Trump, right? It was the news media that made everybody hate Trump, I think, anyway. Because, like, how do you go from, like, loving somebody so much to, like, just hating someone off, like, a dime, right? But they talked about Trump. They talked about, like, how he was, like, a little bit successful in, like, this whole billionaire versus billionaire thing with Vince McMahon and everything else. And they just talked about how Trump is today and how it's like, oh, I can see how that is. And they also talked about, I think the last episode, I forget to mention that they had talked about Linda McMahon pretty much working with Trump eventually. So another thing they talked about in episode 6 was how things were just slow, like I said, slowing down. And now that Stone Cold Steve Austin was gone, what was Vince McMahon going to do? And they had this idea, well, Vince McMahon had this idea that why don't we just kill Mr. McMahon off? And Mr. McMahon, they wanted Mr. McMahon to go crazy, right? To go insane, and Mr. McMahon's like, why don't we just kill the character? And I was like, okay. And they're like, oh, go, okay, sure. So, Mr. McMahon did this weird ass crazy freaking promo, and then he starts walking towards his limousine, and as he's going towards his limousine, he's slowly going there, and that's the one with like the white limousine, and he goes into the limousine, and he has his foot out, and he slowly closes the door. And he doesn't close the door, and he closes the door, and as soon as he closes the door, it's like a boom, the big ass explosion happens, and you're just like, what the fuck just happened? They killed Mr. McMahon. It just, I don't know what the storyline was supposed to be and how they were supposed to bring him back to life or whatever, but the storyline had to be cut short because WWE was faced with actual death with Chris Benoit and his wife and son. So Monday, Vince came out and he explained how the character Mr. McMahon was supposed to get killed, but they shut down the thing, and that the show on Raw was going to be dedicated to Chris Benoit because they thought that he was murdered and his whole family was murdered. It wasn't until on that show where everybody's finding out all the details to what really happened. And what really happened was, Chris strangled his wife, suffocated his kid, and then hung himself in the closet or something like that. And then really after that, there really was no mention of Chris Benoit. During this time also, they talked about with Chris Benoit with the drugs, and they went back to the steroids thing and everything else, and they're kind of blaming Vince for the drugs and steroids and all this other stuff and everything else. And they had interviews they showed with this Vince McMahon, talking about we didn't realize what kind of monster he was and everything else, and they just pretty much say, oh, it could have been drugs or steroids, whatever. I don't know. They also mentioned about CTE, and I will put the definition up on the screen so you guys can see what the CTE is. This is just a brief This is just a brief description, but it pretty much hits the point. If you want to go ahead and look it up, you can just go ahead and look it up. All you gotta type in the letter CTE, and it will just automatically go and give you all the information you need to know about it. Because of the whole CTE, they took away the chair shots to the head. So as you know, they still have chair shots, but usually it's on the back, right? It'll be flat, hands on the bottom of the chair, and it'll be towards the back. It will never be on top of the head. And if they do it in the front, it's usually on the side on the top of the chair, and it's jammed into, the chair is folded and it jams into their stomach or something like that, and they hits them on either the stomach or the back, because Vince McMahon, a lot of people get on to him about the whole thing and everything else, that he went and he was I think some other guy named Chris something, I can't remember his name, he used to be the wrestler, and he got a concussion, because that's how you get CTE. You get CTE from concussions and being hit in the head all the time, which makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of chair shots to the head hurts, right? And your brain's up there, it's gonna get damaged, all right? The skull can only do so much, right? The skull can only protect you so much. Now a lot of people Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't believe that this was like CTE. Didn't believe that. They thought that, hey, you know, me was just a fucking Chris Raw was just a monster and he was just a bad guy. I don't know. You know, I don't think they didn't think they was steroids because they're like, oh, it looks like it was steroids. And I don't know if I've never been hit in the head so many times that I wanted to like do something like that. But I do think that you getting hit in the head a lot probably can't be good for your brain. Another thing that happened they talked about was basically the superstars getting drug tested, and if they were on drugs they would help them go to treatment. Even if there was like 4 more superstars who needed help, they would go and do the drug treatments and everything like that. That was like a policy. It was like, which I think it was a good idea. They also talked about like why also like all these people were dying, like Tess and Eddie Guerrero and everything else and stuff like that. They gave like kind of like made it look like, well, it's because Vince McMahon's working them too hard or stuff like that. You know what? I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think it is, but who knows? But it was kind of like weird. I mean, they would be on drugs. Some of them were, you know, so who knows? Who knows? Another thing they talked about was the streak. The Undertaker streak. Undertaker was 21-0 at one WrestleMania, and they gave it both the streak to have Brock Lesnar. Well, at the time before Undertaker got to the arena that night, he figured he was winning, and then like maybe like an hour before the match started, he's like, oh no, we're gonna put Brock Lesnar over and he's gonna break the streak. Now personally, I think that either freaking someone else should have broke the streak, like maybe Roman Reigns or even Randy Orton, or the streak shouldn't have been broken. I don't think it should have been Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar during that time did not need to be over. Brock Lesnar was already over. He did not need to be over. Right? He didn't need that. I don't know why. I mean, I have a hunch, but I don't know why they gave him that opportunity. Because they could have gave it to Roman Reigns, I think. So also during this time, because WWE was starting to get a lot of sponsors, and most of these sponsors were kind of like kid friendly, and they didn't really like some of the things that were going on in the Ruthless Aggression era. So it went from Ruthless Aggression to the PG era, which was the era that pretty much everyone just stopped watching wrestling. I still watched because I'm a dedicated fan, but yeah, they went from PG-14 with a little bit more like adult-ish to PG TV, which was more kid friendly. This is when basically they went from like one extreme to another extreme, to like being like really raunchy and dirty, to like just being clean. Watch what you say, don't say that, no blood. When there was blood, oh my god, just put black and white screen on there, because we can't have that, because you know the kids and we have sponsors and everything else, and it was just so fucking boring and stupid, and I don't know why they fucking did that for, but you know, I digress. So that's what happened. This is like, I want to say 2009-ish up or whatever. I mean, the PG era was pretty bad. A lot of people stopped watching it because it was like, what is this shit? Right? I like to call it the Divas era, because there was just a bunch of this divas. But here's the thing, right? Another thing that it wasn't so bad about this era is because a lot of ladies now are like more than just eye candy, and they were actually doing some wrestling and everything else, and some of them were really pretty good. They were so good then eventually people online were like, we want to, show more of the divas. We want more divas. We want more women's wrestling. And they were so good that they ended up having a women's evolution. And I would love to have women's evolution part 2. This women's evolution, if you didn't know what it was a pay-per-view, which is nothing but women, and all these women just killed the show. Like, I agree when my friend Tim was like saying that he would like to see a show maybe for an hour of just nothing but like these women wrestling and stuff like that. I remember back in the day there was a wrestling show called Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, and it was nothing but just ladies wrestling each other, and it was fantastic. And I would love to see something like that, because especially nowadays these women are so good. I'm sorry, some of these women are probably better wrestlers than some men are. I know that's probably a hard thing to swallow up, but it's true. It's so fucking true. 2006, Shane McMahon shows back up on the ring. He gets a phone call from his dad, and he goes back up again and everything else. And this is where, like, basically Stephanie McMahon is about to inherit everything, and then Shane comes up and says that basically, well, you and your husband are running the company to the ground. Goes up and goes up to his father and starts talking shit, and basically to say, hey, I want to run Monday Night Raw. Vince McMahon was like, sure, but you have to do a match, and I'll tell you when and who and everything else. And basically the match was at WrestleMania versus The Undertaker in a street match? Was it a cage match? I can't remember. And Undertaker and Shane just went through the limit and everything else, and they went through all kinds of stuff and everything else. Eventually, Undertaker won. But I think the one thing that Shane McMahon wanted, and I think he mentioned how he wanted to just have his dad be proud of him. Kind of like how, Vince wanted his dad to be proud of him. And, I don't know if he told Shane that night how proud he was of him, but like, he gave him a hug. You can totally tell. You can video of, Shane McMahon going back there and getting a hug from his dad and pat on the dad, and he's just like, I don't know if he actually told him he was proud of him and everything like that, but you can tell right? And the Shane was like, that's all I ever wanted from you. And they also talked about how this Shane went through a whole bunch of shit to get to that moment to where it's like he finally got his dad's approval, I guess you could say. But then Vince McMahon did say in the interview that he was proud of Shane. So, that's good, I guess. A lot of the superstars on the interview was talking about how, Vince McMahon was a father figure to them. And, by the way, I must mention, I don't know if I mentioned this, and I probably not, but all this was happening before all the allegations towards Vince, so just keep that in mind. But like, yeah, all the superstars like, yeah, he was like a father figure to me. I thought of him as a second dad or something like that, which makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So then they talked about, Vince McMahon, will he ever retire? And a lot of superstars was like, no, I don't think so. I think he'll be in his business until his dying breath. And then they start talking about all these superstars saying this, and then you see clips of them talking about the SA grapes allegations from Janelle, I guess, I can't remember her last name, and everything else. They did have news articles and clips and talking about how he resigned from to be like CEO or chairman, whatever the fuck he was, that position. They also noted that in this Netflix documentary that after the allegations came up, he pretty much quit the interviews. So there's still some of the interviews on there, but most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about was after, you know, he had quit. So anyway, so after he resigns, he ends up coming back as like kind of like behind the scenes kind of thing. Like you could totally tell that a Vince McMahon match versus a Triple H match for sure. You know, you knew he was back. It's like, is he back? Like, what are these freaking matches? He's like, they suck. When Vince McMahon came back, Stephanie left. Now, I don't know if Stephanie left because Vince McMahon came back or not, or what. I'm not sure, and I'm not gonna make that assumption. I don't know. Okay, I don't know what happened there. But Stephanie McMahon went, you know, she resigned from being COO, right? And as Vince McMahon came back, Vince McMahon was really on screen, but he was behind the scenes. The company, they talked about TKO buying a little bit of buying WWE and buying UFC, so they're not combined together and stuff like that and everything else, and how Vince McMahon pretty much is less of on the border like thing because TKO bought most of it, I guess you could say. They did a little bit of dive in that. So they talked about a lot of allegations, the sexual allegations toward Vince McMahon. They went up into a deep dive with that as well. I will not discuss all of that. You can go and watch it for yourself, and you go look it up for yourself. So at the end of this episode, they asked the superstars and other people, what is Vince McMahon's legacy going to be? A lot of people said what they had to say. I'm not going to tell you what they say. But some of them was like, I can say most of them were probably stuck. Except for one guy. I liked one guy's answer, and I would agree with this one guy when he's a great promoter. That would be his legacy. He's a great promoter. No matter what it is, I honestly think that even with everything that's going on, I think that if Vince McMahon came back even for a screen appearance, that shit, people would go through the roof. Right? I don't know if all the allegations are true. I know right now they talked about at the end also, he's in federal investigating. So the Janelle court case is being on pause while this federal court case is going on. But yeah, there was this one guy at the end. It was like this was pretty much going to be a hit piece on Mr. McMahon. Because Mr. McMahon, I think Vince McMahon is probably as both Mr. McMahon and Vince McMahon, because I hear a lot of bad things about him, but I hear a lot of good things about him too. I learned how he was like helping like someone's wife with their cancer and everything, and paying for like cancer treatment and stuff like that, and all the other good stuff that he does and everything else. I think that there is good and there is bad in Mr. McMahon. I'm not going to, because of all the bad shit that it is presenting right now, I'm not going to cancel out the good shit that he did. Because listen, at the end of the day, and I'm just speaking for myself here, he is the reason why I watch wrestling today. He changed it up. He changed the game up. Made me watch wrestling today. Right? As much as I want to hate him, I hate him for the things that he's being accused of, but that's really if he actually did those things or not. And they did mention something about like Brock Lesnar too and stuff like that. But if he did that, I hate him for that. But I do like the fact that he was an amazing person on screen. He was, if there was ever a GOAT for heels on a fucking screen, I'd give it to Mr. McMahon for sure. He is probably the GOAT of heels, because that was a motherfucker you just love to hate. You love to hate him, and it was so much so that people love to hate him in real life now. So he was a great promoter. and an excellent fucking heel. I don't know what's gonna happen. I could say that this turn probably was not going to be a hit piece, because like I said, these interviews were done before all the allegations started. But we already knew that they probably already had the deal of, you know, Netflix. It was that, and they didn't know everything was gonna come to a head. You know, eventually, you know, Mr. McMahon, Vince stepped down for good, and then TKO took over, and you know, Vince is out for good. You know. So I mean, he did mention about like, oh, he didn't really like the interview, stuff like that, and everything else, and it turned into a hit piece, you know, which of course that's gonna happen. You know, you want more eyeballs. I'm not saying that I like everything about Vince McMahon, the real Vince McMahon. If he did all this stuff, I don't know everything. I don't know the whole story. If he did it, well, fuck him. But at the same time, I'm gonna say again, he was a bigger part of why people watch wrestling. Anyways, yeah, I thought that it was a good series. I'm glad I watched it. There's some stuff that I didn't know that I learned, and good to learn new things about people and everything else, I guess. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. If you want to watch it, it's on Netflix. It's called Mr. McMahon. You should go check it out if you like wrestling. If you want to know about Mr. McMahon and everything like that. But I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will have another video tomorrow. Nothing to do with wrestling, but if you're interested, go check it out. But until then, I will see you in my next video. Bye.